I really like how you said being comfortable with your dog's arousal, because obviously for every dog that's going to look completely different, right? They're all going to have different levels of arousal, different things that get them aroused, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk for a minute on like ways that you see people, one, avoid their dog's arousal, right? Or not be comfortable with it in the first place, and things they could do to start being comfortable with the arousal? If that makes sense.
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing that you see probably also just on online is arousal that has either excitement attached to it or aggression, and that's where it gets tricky.
Sure.
What happens in the brain is actually very similar. It's just the motivation is a little bit different behind these behaviors. But that's where then the sit comes in, and no, and leave it, and place, and down, right? Because that's where we want it to be the opposite usually. So there's a lot of discomfort with, oh my God, my dog knocked over grandma, right? Out of excitement because he or she loves her. Oh my God, my dog is going to attack this dog out of whatever aggressive behavior. So the fear that we have with it, what the consequences might be, makes us really, really uncomfortable seeing our dogs being that aroused.
Sure.
So our natural instinct is to just put a lid on it, right? It's like, stop that. I'm embarrassed. Instead of like, it's like, hey, I'm gonna, and this is really something that is tough because, you know, humans also judge. We judge each other. Like, you're not a good dog owner. You don't know what you're doing with this dog. I know better than you, right? So you feel embarrassed. And sometimes you kind of have to be with your voice and your emotions that you put in, kind of, you know, very out there to get your dog's attention back.
Sure.
And if it's outside and it's like, hey, Bruno, let's go this way. Yay, you got a good boy. And you run the opposite direction. It might look weird to others.
Sure.
But it's just what it takes maybe to handle your dog in those moments. And that takes some practice and boldness.
Yeah, definitely. This is where I would say my love-hate relationship with commands like place and down and stuff come in, right? Because they are such good management skills that we could have, right? Like I always use the example of like when my grandmother-in-law comes over the house, right? She's, you know, freaking 87 at this point and can't have my Malinois running underfoot while she's bringing things in, obviously. So I have to use, you know, certain commands in order to manage him effectively in that moment. But if I'm constantly only ever using those commands to manage him in that moment, it's almost creating this buildup of excitement for when I go to release him, which is going to make him 10 times more energetic, you know? And I see that a lot as we use like the place command, almost like a slingshot, where we put them on it and the dogs are like building themselves up. It's like then we release them and they take all that energy full bore towards whatever it is we're trying to keep them away from, where it's necessary sometimes, right? There are situations where you have to do that, but I try to coach people through addressing, you know, why is the dog so stimulated when people are coming over in the first place, and combating that anticipation as well, right? So if people are coming right in and it's always the 15-minute love fest of the dogs as soon as they come in, obviously they're going to have that anticipation of all of that happening as soon as they get released off of the place board, right? So I feel like the management of those types of commands without addressing that side of things is just, it's so counterproductive. And I heard a trainer one time use the I think it probably a created definition on his part, but he talked about, you know, physical restraint and then mental restraint. And I'm really curious to hear your opinions on this concept of mental restraint, of using obedience or, you know, some sort of restraint that's not physical, obviously, in order to keep the dog away from things that they want to get to, and that creating tons of frustration and stress.
Yeah, so I think it's never black and white, and you know, staying on your place bed, even though you want to come off, and not constantly testing, you know, like, okay, now one paw is off, and now the other paw is off, and now my butt wiggles off, you know. There, you know, the dog is not relaxed, right? It's just waiting for that moment. And working through this mental restraint or even physical restraint, working through certain levels of stress is incredibly important. Every dog should have that skill. We are living in like a society where there's constantly restraint. You have to stop at the traffic light. There's a car. There are babies running. Don't go there, right? Don't pick up the chicken wing bones. So much normal impulse control has to happen regardless. So if the dog doesn't learn to work through some of the stress and control impulses, just making everything harder. And we're going to have more anxiety, medication prescription and all that. So I think it's important, but it takes some time. You have to take the time to teach that to your dog. You can't just expect that to happen, right? The dog, like little bouts of stress, and help your dog to work through stress, help your dog to not bounce immediately off the place, but challenge your dog in a way that is safe still, right? And where you are in a good headspace. Then you start doing this also in these situations. So my Melanie, right, is kind of very aroused when someone comes in, not out of excitement, just generally hates people, and especially people coming in. And, like when someone comes in and I let her come into the living room, there is no go on your place bed immediately. That's not going to happen. First, there's like, hey, let's do an engagement training session. Don't worry, there's someone around, but we know how to do this together regardless. And that's the first 30 seconds. And it's like, okay, now go on your place bed. Don't worry about this. I'm here next to you. Here's something to do.
Yeah.
So I still help. We still get there. We still do these things, but I don't expect her to do this in the very beginning. And the more you kind of set up these moments in training where there is mental restraint or physical restraint, the faster you will get your dog to not freak out. The faster is the roll down back to baseline and exciting or stressful situations.